The beautiful boy with a beautiful game. That's how many remember George Best in his native Belfast. A genius footballer with a tumultuous private life. Well, my next guest knew him better than most and has written a book that combines his personal and professional memories to create a fresh and honest account of a sporting icon. The book is George Best, a memoir, and the author is Michael Parkinson. Michael, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Do you recall your first meeting with George?
I recall it very well indeed. Matt Busby, I was working at Granada Television in 1963, 62. And Matt Busby became a friend, and he was telling me about this kid they'd been recommended in Northern Ireland as something very, very special. And he came over the first time, then disappeared, went back home, then came back again. And on that period, then Matt got him into the team. And I saw his very first game against West Bromwich Albion. And they put him against a fierce fullback called Graham Williams, Welsh international. And this kid showed no inclination at all in believing that this man was an international, never mind he was on the field. And he nutmegged him the first time he ever did that. And this guy was a fierce guy, a little runty guy who used to kick people for a living. And George made such an ass of this guy that, in fact, Matt Busby in the end switched him to wing, the opposite wing, in the second half. And then about 10 years later, standing together, George and I, outside Chelsea Football Club, can't remember why. And Graham Williams came by, and he looked at me and looked at George and said, "George, can I ask you a favour?" And George says, "What's that?" He said, "Stand still for a minute, because all I've ever seen is your backside disappearing down the touchline. I don't know what you look like either." So that was the first time. I mean, yeah, you wanted to see George once to understand that he was special.
Yeah. His abilities, I mean, the hard men, they were all in defence. We're all told, get this guy.
That's right.
And he just never managed to get himself hurt. No, he was so quick.
He was extraordinary, and he was strong too. I mean, he might have looked frail when he walked on the wispy, but he wasn't that at all. And he was a tough competitor. You kicked him, he'd kick you back, with interest. I mean, it wasn't a soft touch to George at all. He was an extraordinary footballer, the best player I ever saw. And that's a huge claim to make, I know that. But I've got Matt Busby on my side, and he knew a thing or two about it too. Yeah. And he said to me, I said to him when he said that to me, I said, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "Because in every position in the team, he's a better player than any I've got."
Wow.
And I thought, oh, gosh, I mean, that is an extraordinary thing to say. He said, and maybe, he said, he's a better goalkeeper than Harry Gregg, but I don't tell Harry that because it killed George.
If George's story starts in May of 1946 when he was born, I suppose the chapter we all know about is the bit that started really with the Munich air disaster in February of 1958, because had that not happened, George's rise might have been a little more ordered and a little more controlled.
I think that's right. It's a kind of mythical story, really, in a sense, because it's about Matt Busby's disappointment and the horror of Munich and losing his team and losing his player, his George Best, if you like, in that team was Duncan Edwards. And he never thought he'd find the replacement, because that was a key to it all, that one great, truly great player. And then after that horrific crash and all that he went through and all that, and his team too, a disaster it was. I'm feeling guilty because, he'd gone to Europe against the advice of those people, the mandarins in London, the football bosses who didn't want to know about European leagues and things like that. All that confusion. All of a sudden this child appears. And Matt didn't need telling that he'd found the answer to Duncan Edwards. And George took on that role. And George became the man who actually got him the European Cup.
10 years later, in 1968.
So from that point of view, it's a very persuasively mythical story. It really is. It's wonderful.
You make the point in the book that when we look at the people like Messi and Ronaldo now, that George was the first of them, really. That he created the milieu, the rock star milieu, that enabled all of these guys to commercialise themselves.
Yes, well, at the same time as George arrived, of course, the 60s happened. And that's fundamentally, if you were there, you understood how wonderful it was. That bit you can remember, that is.
The 50s were monochrome, the 60s were...
They switched the light on, didn't they? That's what they did. I mean, people forget how drab the war years were, and the 50s were as well, awful. But all of a sudden, the 60s happened, the music, the actors, and it was all centred, the centre of the universe as far as that revolution was concerned, was Manchester. And it was because of the Beatles, it was because of the music, because of the actors, because of the writers, and all that, the Coronation Street, all that bit happening at once. When all of a sudden society changed, and young people had this chance, they could see the ball at the end of the corridor there, they could see the prize, rather. And George is part of that. George is a poster boy for it. I mean, if the Beatles were the Fab Four, well, I mean, he looked like them, didn't he? The Fab Five. I mean, that's.
He was called the fifth Beatle by many people,
and he was that. And he brought to football a dimension we'd not seen before, a glamour. And a wit about it.
Now, when he arrived, he was a shy young fella, wispy thing from Belfast, with this incredible skill. And the typical thing for a football manager to do at the time was get him a stout landlady who'd keep him in check, or else, as happened with a lot of them, get them married off early.
That's right. Well, Matt had an even better idea later on, but first of all, he put him in digs with the Mrs. Fullaway. And George would park the latest Jaguar outside, and in his bedroom we had 10 open sacks of mail from girls from all over the world. He had no backup at all, nobody really looking after him. His agent was a rather nice but ineffectual man who lived in Huddersfield. I had no idea what he got there. And so George was actually naked in a sense, and I think it might have been different again had 10 years later had he arrived, because then they were getting into place, footballers, agents and people like that to look after them. George had none of that. So he was left to make all his own mistakes. Matt never understood George. I mean, when you think about it, Matt loved George, which was a different thing, and George loved Matt, but they never understood each other. I mean, Matt would call him into the room and give him a sort of fatherly dressing down, and George said, I just watched, he had wallpaper behind him which had animals on. I used to count the animals and say, I wish to God he'd shut up and I could run have a drink. And then the best thing of all, the most extraordinary thing of all, when you think about it in modern day terms, is here's the greatest footballer in the world, whose manager thinks that the solution to the problem of misbehaving and staying out late is to actually put him into digs with Pat Crerand. And that's what he did. He went to live with the Crerans.
Yeah, Pat and Noreen. And you wrote a satirical column imagining what it was like with the lodger.
Mrs. Crerand's diary.
Yeah.
I don't think she'll forgive me for that. But it was too good. It was a blessing in disguise. It dropped in my lap, about trying to sort of keep up with this lodger of theirs,
And all Mrs. Crerand was doing was cooking bangers and mash and other fairly typical working class puds for the lads.
And ordering a comic or two and Beano dandy or something. I mean, it was greatly exaggerated, but I thought it was funny in any way. But it was just typical of the times. Nobody still. I think today it's difficult to actually express to people, to describe to people the difference between then and now. And what might have been, George. But that apart, we're talking about making comparisons. I mean, George, you have to always remember, was playing at a time when it was the given thing for defenders to kick forwards of a delicate nature, they hoped, George would come off the field black and blue. I mean, literally, I used to see him after games. All the back of his legs were green and black and brown where he'd been kicked. They're also playing on pitches that were knee-deep in mud. Now, you imagine best today in a situation with perfect grounds and the players unable to, not allowed by law now, to touch them even. I mean, Michael, my son, pointed out when doing the book, he said, it's extraordinary. When you think about the boy Messi today, George could play Messi's era, but could Messi have played in George's era? That might be the difference, you see. Because he was as brave as hell, George was. He really was an extraordinary athlete.
Now, he was a handsome guy, shy in some ways,
yes.
But obviously he took to this life that was offered to him. The girls, the drink, and gambling at one point, but he kind of got that in check, did he not?
Yes, so he had a good whirl at it. Most things you could become addictive to, George tried. Something never gave up, like girls and booze and that sort of thing. The thing about George, of course, was that he was very bright. And when he arrived in England, he was tongue-tied only because he had no confidence at all. As soon as he discovered that he knew he could speak, as soon as he thought that people actually accepted him as being an intelligent lad, which he was, then you couldn't stop him. I mean, it was a delight to interview. You know, I interviewed him. Did you interview him?
I've interviewed him many times over the years.
I'm sure you have. And you found it to be a very good interview, an honest interview. And he never once, and I suppose it's the same with you, because then when he respected it, he would never ever turn up with a worse drink.
Yeah, even though he might have had a few,
yes,
he was well able to take care of himself.
Exactly, so there's a difference between that and being, as he was at the Terry Wogan show, spectacularly drunk.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an awful thing to happen to him.
The why is, it's the central question of your book, is why did he turn out like that? Now, there was alcoholism in his family.
That's right.
But you wonder what else was it to compensate for that shyness, was the self-destruct button pressed early on, and this was going to be a long road, but with an inevitable end?
Well, maybe he was an alcoholic. His mother was an alcoholic. Maybe there's a factor there, genetic. I don't know. We don't know. There's a theory which says so. But also, too, I think that Hugh McElvenney said once in a piece that his opinion was that as soon as George took a drink, the very first time, because he's an alcoholic, he was on the downward slope. And maybe that's true as well. He seemed to have... George wanted to please everybody. So when he was at his worst, he would actually really try to have things done to him but he had no will to do it. But he did it because to please other people, men or sometimes girls, sometimes people he was attached to. So he had all the pellets inserted in his belly and all that. And
this is the antabuse to
all that stuff, And he once said to me, I don't know if it does me any good at all, but it pleases them, And that was what his life was full of, that kind of compromise.
I seem to remember him telling me that he was the only one that had ever been able to take a drink while having antabuse in his system. So, I mean...
Well, we laugh at that, but of course, again, the awful thing about George, the thing that a lot of people can't forgive him for, is that he had 2 livers.
Yeah.
And, he had the first liver, and then he drank himself to a situation where he had to have another one. Now, you don't do that, do you? I mean, if a guy gives you a liver, that is
it's another life that could have been saved.
Precisely, exactly. And that was something he could never actually face up to an answer properly at all. Because he just didn't know.
His affinity for the girls was enormous, and their affinity for him. At one point, you wrote a fictitious account of what it would be like on a night out with George, hoping that George would read it.
Yeah, it didn't make any notes of it, that's for sure. It was the most sort of somber night out and worrying night out I've ever done, actually. It was the piece of a combination of trips I made with George. He once said to me, the difference between you and me, he said, you can't understand me. He said, but I'll tell you what the difference is. He said, we go out on nights and we end up in a bar somewhere, then you go home. He said, I don't go home. I go to another bar, and then another bar, then another bar. So I tested out this theory, and that's what we did. We went and we ended up going into this, I don't know what it was, a shebeen, really, basically, where there's a big samovar in the middle of the room, and you turn the tap, and God knows what came out, but you drank it, and it's like firewater. And I remember leaving that place, and we had to climb a fire escape to get to it outside a building in Manchester. And I climbed up, both of us climbed down together, and it was daylight. And it had passed me by, I was so drunk. And I got downstairs, and the people in the street, the children going to school. I mean, it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, good God, he does this all the time, and yet still plays football. And the piece, I thought, was a somber piece, I thought. I mean, and it was a worrying piece to write in many ways, but I just thought it would give an indication of the depths that George could get to when he was really, really on the road to...
He retired several times from football, and, he seemed to be determined to make a life for himself in business and so on. He could have gone to Europe. I'm sure they were queuing up with offers for George. To what extent was the demise of that European Cup winning team in '68 part of the reason for his retirement from football? Because the others were in decline. He was still not even yet in his prime, I suppose, and yet everything was placed on George's shoulders.
Well, he never... I thought that, to start with, that might have been an adequate excuse for George, but then he never lied to me. And he once said to me that, the real thing that really made him cross was the fact that, Matt had won his European Cup, and so he didn't rebuild the team as he should have done, and the players around him were getting older, and he was still the star, he's still one certainty in the team, and that he just felt that he needed a bit more support than he had before. And of course, it was a short career, and yet when you look at George, he's been played from 1917 to, what was it, about 10 years later. I mean, he played a lot of football. He was rarely injured. I mean, he had a very, very great strain on him as an athlete. So it might have been something to do with it. I never quite worked that one out. I'd like to believe that was true, that one of the tensions on him, one of the reasons that swayed his mind, was that he was kind of feeling that, listen, I'm alone in this team. They're all going, all the best players, so what am I going to do? That doesn't match with the fact that actually what he did then was he went to play for non-league clubs, and anybody who would have him, persuaded by one or two senior players and managers who should have known better. And that was the beginning of the end. And Matt said, actually, to me, that he believed that George's decline started the day they won the European Cup. For what reason he didn't elaborate, but maybe he felt like George as well, that maybe he himself had done what he wanted to do. And
Is that it? Is that all there is?
Yes,
I've done that. I've won the
precisely.
European Cup.
I've won the European
Is
Cup.
there anything?
Yeah.
The end piece of the book is written by your son, Michael Jr.,
Yes.
and in it there's an analogy, I suppose, of the Roman generals coming back from war, and they are given a parade through the city
Yes.
to the adulation of the thousands and thousands of Roman citizens who welcome them back.
Yes.
But hidden in the chariot, below public view, is a slave who has one job to do, and that is to say, "You are but a man. You are but a man." Remind the guy, in spite of the adulation, you're human.
Yes.
And George did not have that.
No, well, maybe he did later on. I mean, I'm not putting myself forward as being that person, but we all, more than me, the really close friends to George did try to talk to him about that and say, look, for God's sake, what are you throwing away? Where are you going with this? But he wouldn't have it. By that time, he was too far gone. And you have to consider, too, that he's an alcoholic, or he was an alcoholic. Now, there's a difference between being that and a heavy drinker. They're different, mentally different, But he never let me down. He never did anything with me but be a very good and true friend. And I miss him greatly. And I was in Australia, sadly, when he died. And I felt that I'd never said to him what I wanted to say to him about our relationship and our friendship. And so that's really the book. I mean, it's a letter to a lost friend, basically.
Yeah. Finally, and I interviewed them both, Alex Percy and George together, and I thought, here is redemption. But it wasn't to be.
No.
History repeated itself again.
Yes, I don't think anybody could have saved him at that point. I really don't. I just do not. The die was cast. And it was very, very sad. Because, all else apart, I can talk to the cows come home about how great a football and argue was the best. I think it was the best football I've ever seen. I doubt I'll ever see anybody better than that. But more than that, he was a good and true friend to me and my family.
And the lads played football with him in the back garden.
What a claim to fame, eh?
But they never got to touch the ball.
No, he wouldn't give the ball away at all. He was so competitive, it wasn't true.
Even with kids.
He came down, he used to come down to a charity cricket game every year, and he didn't play cricket, but he could come down. And one day took a stunning catch in the outfield because his hand-eye coordination was exceptional. But we decided to make a bit out of it because, we make a bit of money for the thing. So they felt charity. So we had a goal set up, right? And George was a goalkeeper. After 20 minutes, he had 20 crying children because they wouldn't let the ball past him. They were moaning and crying at the person. For God's sake, George, leave the... No, why? He's letting him score past me. It's appalling.
Which explains
It
everything.
explains everything. I mean, maybe that's the key. Maybe you have to be that competitive, that dedicated, and that insensitive to crying children.
Well, it is a wonderful book. You will read it in one sitting, I guarantee. It's called George Best, a Memoir. It's published by Hodder and Stoughton, and its author, Michael Parkinson. Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed it as usual.